Welcome back to our channel, where we dive deep into the most compelling, heart-wrenching, and explosive storylines unfolding in Genoa City. Today is a truly beautiful day to unpack the intense emotional drama that is currently tearing our favorite families apart. Grab a comfortable seat and prepare yourself, because the latest developments are nothing short of breathtaking. The atmosphere inside society was suffocatingly dense, thick with an unspoken dread that seemed to cling to the very walls of the upscale establishment. Lily Winters sat at a table, her posture radiating a profound, bone-deep exhaustion that went far beyond mere physical fatigue. The devastating reality of Malcolm Winters' severe aplastic anemia had become a waking nightmare for the entire family, a relentless ticking clock that threatened to steal yet another patriarch from their lives. The ghost of Neil Winters seemed to hover over every interaction, a silent, tragic reminder of the losses this family had already endured. Lily was operating on the absolute fringes of her emotional endurance, carrying the staggering weight of her father's fading life while desperately searching for a biological miracle that seemed entirely out of reach. The crushing revelation that neither the twins, Maddie and Charlie, nor Malcolm's newly discovered son, Holden Novak, were viable bone marrow matches had plunged Lily into a state of sheer, unadulterated desperation. Every passing hour felt like a physical blow, and the lack of viable options was slowly extinguishing the last embers of her hope. The oppressive tension only magnified when Devon Winters and Nate Hastings approached her table, their presence casting a heavy, interrogative shadow over Lily's fragile state. Devon, currently consumed by a toxic cocktail of unresolved trauma and blinding cynicism, immediately initiated a relentless inquiry into Malcolm's medical status. His demeanor was not one of gentle brotherly support, but rather a demanding, almost aggressive need for control. Nate stood silently beside him, a complex figure of quiet observation. Nate carried his own profound scars, both physical and emotional, intricately tied to the violent history he shared with Devon. The irony of Nate, a brilliant former surgeon whose career was permanently shattered by Devon's fists, standing as a silent witness to Devon's current emotional unraveling, was a poignant undercurrent to the unfolding tragedy. Nate was also internally reeling from the staggering, world-altering revelation of Holden's true parentage, making his silent presence at the table heavy with unspoken shock and complicated familial loyalties. As Devon relentlessly pressed for updates, demanding to know what avenues were left to explore, Lily finally shattered the agonizing silence with a revelation that instantly altered the gravitational pull of the room. She calmly but firmly disclosed that there was, in fact, another option currently being explored. The name she dropped into the tense space between them was none other than Cain Ashby. Lily revealed that Cain, witnessing the absolute depths of her despair, had voluntarily stepped forward to undergo the rigorous genetic testing required to see if he could serve as a donor for Malcolm. The mere mention of Cain's name in this deeply vulnerable context was enough to send shockwaves through the Winters family dynamic. Cain's history with Lily was a sprawling, complicated tapestry of profound love, devastating betrayals, shattered trust, and enduring connection. For him to suddenly insert himself into the epicenter of this life-or-death medical crisis was a development that neither Devon nor Nate could process without immediate, visceral suspicion. Devon's reaction was instantaneous and entirely devoid of grace. His mind, currently warped by a deep-seated paranoia and an inability to see genuine altruism, immediately rejected the notion that Cain's actions were born of pure, selfless intention. Devon launched into a bitter, cynical interrogation of Cain's underlying motives. He articulated a dark, accusatory theory, suggesting that Cain was merely weaponizing Lily's profound grief and vulnerability to orchestrate his own romantic redemption. In Devon's fractured worldview, nobody performed an act of such monumental sacrifice without expecting a substantial return on investment. He challenged Lily to see the situation through his deeply jaded perspective, insisting that Cain was calculating his every move. utilizing Malcolm's tragic illness as a strategic pawn to manipulate Lily's emotions and force his way back into her heart and her bed. Devon's absolute refusal to believe in Kane's sincerity highlighted the profound darkness that had recently consumed his own soul. Nate, though far less explosive than Devon, silently aligned with the skepticism radiating from his cousin. Nate's history with Kane, coupled with his deep protective instincts toward Lily, made him acutely aware of the lengths Kane had historically gone to in order to win Lily back. Nate quietly reinforced Devon's narrative, pointing out the extensive, often desperate efforts Kane had made in the past to reclaim his position in Lily's life. The underlying implication from both men was clear. They believed Lily was being blinded by her sheer desperation, allowing a known manipulator to exploit the most terrifying moment of her life under the guise of heroism. They viewed Kane not as a potential savior, but as an opportunistic predator circling a wounded family. However, Lily was in no mood to entertain their toxic, backward-looking paranoia. The narrative of her response was one of fierce, protective fury and absolute, unwavering clarity. She vehemently dismissed their concerns, shutting down their cynical theories with a volcanic intensity that left no room for debate. Lily made it abundantly clear that the complex history of her romantic entanglements with Kane was entirely irrelevant in the face of her father's imminent demise. She articulated a raw, heartbreaking truth. Her desperation had completely stripped away the luxury of holding grudges or analyzing underlying motives. If Kane Ashby possessed the biological key to keeping Malcolm Winters breathing, she would embrace him as a savior, regardless of whatever romantic or personal expectations he might harbor in the aftermath. Lily's focus was entirely, singularly fixed on the preservation of life, rendering all other interpersonal dramas entirely obsolete in her eyes. Lily did not stop at merely defending Kane. She turned her fierce emotional intellect directly onto Devon, delivering a devastating critique of his current psychological state. She pointedly highlighted how his relentless obsession with past grievances and his inability to recognize a genuine act of salvation was a glaring indictment of his own twisted priorities. Lily exposed the tragic reality that Devon was so consumed by his own bitterness and his insatiable need to control the narrative that he was actively prioritizing his hatred for Kane over the potential survival of their father. Her words were a sharp, precise surgical strike against Devon's ego, laying bare the deeply uncomfortable truth that his protective facade was actually masking a deeply toxic, self-serving vindictiveness that was threatening to alienate the sister who needed him most. Before Devon could mount a defense against Lily's piercing accusations, the volatile atmosphere inside society was violently disrupted by the arrival of Abby Winters. Abby's entrance was not a casual one. She carried with her an aura of profound anxiety and a physical document that practically radiated legal doom. In her hand was a formal letter from Devon's legal representation, a piece of paper that held the power to either vindicate Devon's relentless quest for vengeance or plunge him into an inescapable abyss of rage. The document pertained to the highly contentious, deeply agonizing legal battle surrounding Mariah Copeland and the traumatic kidnapping of baby Dominic. This was the open wound that had been slowly poisoning Devon and Abby's marriage, a festering trauma that Devon refused to let heal. As Devon tore open the envelope, the entire room seemed to hold its collective breath. The history of the surrogacy, the heartbreaking mental collapse of Mariah, the sheer, unimaginable terror of discovering Dominic was missing, and the subsequent psychological fallout had fundamentally altered the DNA of the Winters family. Devon had channeled all of his terror and helplessness from that dark period into a singular, obsessive crusade to see Mariah face the maximum federal penalty for her actions. He had relentlessly petitioned the courts to overturn her negotiated plea deal, demanding a level of punitive justice that he believed was the only way to balance the scales of his trauma. The letter he now held contained the definitive ruling from the judicial system regarding his desperate, vindictive petition. The revelation of the court's decision was the catalyst for a total psychological collapse. The legal system had definitively rejected Devon's request. The plea deal would be upheld, and Mariah Copeland would not face the draconian prison sentence that Devon had so desperately sought. The moment Devon processed this reality, a blinding, unhinged fury consumed him entirely. It was a rage born not just of legal frustration, but of a profound, agonizing impotence. He felt entirely betrayed by a system that refused to validate the magnitude of his suffering. His reaction was explosive, a terrifying manifestation of unresolved pain that instantly incinerated any remaining semblance of rational thought. Devon's anger became a tangible, destructive force within the restaurant, projecting his deep internal misery outward and completely shattering the fragile peace of the moment. Abby watched her husband's explosive unraveling with a mixture of profound horror and deep, agonizing heartbreak. The man standing before her, consumed by a hateful, vindictive rage, was becoming entirely unrecognizable. Abby had fought desperately to maintain the stability of their home, prioritizing the emotional well-being of their son, Dominic, above all else. She understood the nuance of Mariah's mental breakdown and believed that clinical treatment, rather than punitive incarceration, was the appropriate path forward. Seeing Devon so entirely consumed by a desire to destroy another human being terrified her to her core. It highlighted a fundamental, perhaps irreparable fracture in their marriage, exposing a darkness in Devon that she no longer knew how to navigate or contain. In a desperate, pleading attempt to salvage what was left of his humanity, Abby urged Devon to finally let the vendetta go. She articulated the devastating collateral damage his obsession was causing, implicitly warning him that his relentless pursuit of Mariah's destruction was actively tearing their own family apart. Abby's plea was a desperate cry for peace, a demand that he prioritize the living, breathing child they shared over a toxic need for historical vengeance. She needed him to see that his anger was a poison, seeping into the foundation of their home and threatening to traumatize Dominic in entirely new ways. But Devon, blinded by his own righteous indignation and suffocating bitterness, seemed entirely incapable of receiving her message, leaving their marriage teetering dangerously on the precipice of total ruin. The intense, localized trauma of Devon and Abby's marital implosion was abruptly interrupted by the arrival of Dr. Stephanie Simmons, shifting the room's focus violently back to the overarching medical crisis. Stephanie's presence was inherently commanding, carrying the immense weight of medical authority and a complex, deeply intertwined history with the residents of Genoa City. As Malcolm's former lover and the mother of his newly discovered son, her integration into this family tragedy was fraught with unspoken judgments, historical resentments, and a fiercely protective maternal instinct toward Holden. Her arrival signaled an imminent shift in the narrative, a reminder that while the Winters family was busy tearing themselves apart over past grievances, Malcolm's life continued to slip away in a sterile hospital room. Closely following Stephanie was Holden Novak, a young man carrying a burden of guilt so profound it threatened to crush him entirely. Holden's entire existence had been defined by a lifetime of lies regarding his paternity, only to finally discover his true father just in time to watch him die. The devastating reality that his own genetic makeup had failed to provide the life-saving match Malcolm so desperately needed had plunged Holden into a quiet, suffocating despair. He felt like a failure, an illegitimate son who could offer nothing but his grief to a family that barely knew him. His quiet, defeated demeanor stood in stark contrast to the explosive anger radiating from Devon, creating a heartbreaking tableau of a family drowning in varying manifestations of profound sorrow. The atmospheric pressure inside society reached a critical, almost unbearable mass when the final piece of this agonizing puzzle stepped through the doors. Kane Ashby arrived, the physical embodiment of the family's last, desperate hope. His demeanor was entirely unreadable, a stoic mask that betrayed nothing of the monumental information he carried. The history of his failures, his lies, and his desperate attempts at redemption seemed to trail behind him like a shadow, but in this singular moment, All of that historical baggage was eclipsed by the laboratory results he held. The entire room fell into a heavy, agonizing silence. The collective heartbeat of the Winters family seemingly suspended in time as they waited for the architect of this final gamble to deliver his verdict. Lily's eyes locked onto Kane, her entire being radiating a desperate, unspoken plea for a miracle. The excruciating tension of the silence before Kane spoke was a physical weight, pressing down on everyone present. It was a moment where time itself seemed to fracture, the space between breath and revelation stretching into an eternity. For Lily, this was the absolute precipice. She was standing on the edge of an emotional abyss, entirely dependent on the words about to leave the mouth of the man who had once broken her heart into a million pieces. The irony of her salvation resting in the hands of her greatest heartbreak was a cruel, poetic twist of fate that she was entirely willing to accept if it meant keeping her father alive. When Kane finally broke the silence, his words were simple, yet they carried the force of a seismic event. He confirmed that the results had just been finalized, and in response to Lily's desperate, tearful pleading for good news, he delivered the ultimate miracle. He was a match. Those three simple words instantly shattered the suffocating dread that had held the family captive. The revelation was a monumental, world-altering shift in the emotional landscape. The man who had been viewed with such intense suspicion by Devon, the man whose motives had been so viciously interrogated, was suddenly elevated to the undeniable role of savior. The sheer, staggering irony of the outcast becoming the biological anchor for the family's patriarch was a reality that would forever alter the complex web of relationships within the Winters clan. Watching this storyline unfold evokes a profound, almost overwhelming sense of emotional turbulence within us. There is something deeply tragic, yet incredibly beautiful, about witnessing a family completely fracture under the weight of their own historical traumas, only to be forced into a state of grace by the ultimate, selfless sacrifice of an outsider. We feel a visceral ache for Lily's raw desperation, a deep frustration with Devon's blinding, toxic cynicism, and a profound, reluctant awe at Kane's willingness to step into the fire. It is a stark, heartbreaking reminder that in the face of absolute mortality, our petty grievances, our bitter historical feuds, and our desperate need for control are entirely stripped away, leaving only the raw, undeniable truth of who is willing to bleed to save the people we love. The emotional resonance of this moment is a testament to the enduring, complicated power of human connection, and it leaves us breathless, deeply moved, and entirely captivated by the resilience of the human spirit. But as the initial wave of overwhelming relief washes over Lily, a dark, ominous undercurrent remains entirely unresolved. Will Devon's deep-seated paranoia allow him to accept Kane's sacrifice with genuine grace? Or will this profound act of heroism only fuel his toxic insecurities and further destroy his fracturing marriage to Abby? Can Lily truly separate her immense, life-saving gratitude from the deeply buried, complicated romantic love she once harbored for Kane? Or is this miracle a catalyst for a dangerous emotional relapse? With Malcolm's life still hanging in the balance of a complex medical procedure and the psychological warfare within the Winters family reaching a fever pitch, the stage is set for an explosive, unpredictable aftermath that promises to change the fabric of Genoa City forever.